My favorite thing about Chris is you go to the meal, he's not at the meal, and then you show up like you're walking through whatever, the treatment center, and you walk past the cafeteria, and he's like the only person in the cafeteria eating cereal.
This like yoga retreat center, right? And Chris used to work, and he would like fill the food up in the lines, and it was like this big buffet kind of that you would go and get food. And speaking of Tim Walsh, his wife Kim Walsh was there, and she walked up, and Chris was like apparently walking up and down the lines like farting. She's like, "Hey Chris, like what are you doing?" And he's like walking by the food. He's like, "Oh, just crop dust in the food."
We like army crawled in the middle of the night up to the base of the camp with the portable speaker, and we just played that shrieking Fisher Cat sound for like 10 minutes, and it created panic.
Now I want to open up another thing. Like when you guys talk about yourselves and why it did work, and I know you can't answer this question, but you were there the whole time. Why didn't it work for Chris in your best understanding?
It's a big one.
Yeah.
All right, so we're welcoming back to the show Ted and Colin, who were both very, very, very close friends with Chris. And this, my family's going away tomorrow to Yellowstone National Park and the Grand Tetons and Moab and all this shit. So I'm not going to get back until the Friday that this show is going to go up, and that's the 7-year anniversary of Chris's death. And Colin, out of nowhere, texted me. A lot of weird things have happened, Ted. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Colin's son moved to my town.
Oh, yeah, I know that.
All right, good, very good.
Yeah, he's my godson, by the way. He's not just Colin's son. He's my godson.
It's multiple title.
Like another father.
Your godson lives in my town. And and out of nowhere, Colin told me he had a lost Chris story that he wanted to share. And I feel like, Dylan was on the show recently, and you guys haven't. Ted, I think you were only on the show one time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
the night before the funeral.
Yeah, the night before the funeral, and then also what else did we do?
With Chris.
No, I was never. This is the night before Chris's funeral.
But didn't you go on with Chris to do the 7 forgeries and 7 years or whatever? What was the title? 7 forgeries and
that's
7
forgeries. That
or
sounds
something?
like that related to me. I can't even remember that. I didn't go on for a while because I work with high school students. I work with minors, so I was very hesitant to share a lot of my personal stuff, for that reason. But yeah, did Chris talk about me? I don't even remember. I definitely remember doing night before Chris's funeral, and then another time, Dave, you drove up to the Berkshires shortly, a couple years after I think Chris's death, or a year after. Is my connection all messed up right now? I'm lagging in and out of my screen.
You were on the show. Hold on. With Chris. Oh, no. He tells the story about you.
Yeah.
And it was called 40 Forgeries and 40
And I think it was
felonies.
supposed to be anonymous, this is a friend of mine, but now cat's out of the bag. That was me, I guess. No, I don't.
I can take this out. Man. I can easily.
It's totally
take this
fine.
But the point is, that's how legendary you are to Chris, that we made a whole episode about you that you wouldn't even be.
Yeah.
That's
Chris
pretty good.
was God. Colin and Chris and I, we got sober together. We lived in a sober house, an apartment together. Chris and Colin were my best friends. They were my soulmates. We all we just came together at that time, and Chris was he was everything to me.
Now I want to deconstruct something really quickly, because you guys are still very young, and somehow I'm become very old. Now
How old are you?
He's gray. Just leave it at that.
I'm 51.
That's crazy.
I'm 51. I met Colin when he was 19.
Child.
20?
No, I was 21.
21. And it's so crazy. We all have children, and we all have lives, and life just rolls along, and Chris is gone. And as our lives get bigger and longer, our time with him loses its ratio in our life. Now, when he was alive in your guys' lives, especially in your early recovery, he was a huge part, and you guys were a huge part of his life. Then when he moved to Boston and he got engaged and his school opened up, our involvement with each other changes. So when we look back, isn't that a weird kind of phenomenon in itself?
Yeah, it's super weird. Because I feel like, it's like the relative amount of time as you get older gets smaller. Like Chris was such a huge part of our world, but Colin, how long were we sober when Chris died? Like how long? Because it's been we've been sober for 14 years now.
So it was 2018. So we were 7 years.
Yeah.
7 years, yeah. So that was 7 years of our life. So for me, 1/5 of my life involved Chris. But it feels more than that, probably because I associate Chris with as such an important piece of my getting sober and my life in recovery. So whenever I think back on, or even like contemplate like just being where I am today, it's deeply rooted in that experience with him and Ted. It's like they were the foundational pieces of being here today. So it does feel like it's like further and further away, but I draw from those memories like every single day. And also like with the work that I do and the houses, we have like pictures of Chris on the wall, and like I work in the house that he lived in for a long time. So it's
and it's kind of like the same
there.
shit with like you think about like childhood friends, people you grew up with, was so pivotal. Even though you only spend like 5-10 years or everything, it's the same thing. Like early recovery, that was like in many ways like a new life for us. Like we all got sober. I'm literally starting my life over, right? So I was 23 when I got sober. I know Chris was like 25 or something like that. And so it's like those next 7 years of like what feels like a new life where you're so close with a couple individuals that like, in some ways 7 years isn't that long of a time, but at the same time it's like an eternity depending on kind of how you view it,
Totally.
Talk about, you guys got sober together.
Yeah.
So give us the story or a bit of it, please.
Chris came in first. Came into Mountainside before me. By the time I got there, he was like notorious, and you were there.
You're talking about that in 2011. Chris got to Mountainside in like January of 2011.
Totally.
I got to Mountainside in May of 2011, and you got to Mountainside in May of 2011.
Yeah, and like by the time I got there, he was just starting to go to groups. It took them like 3 months to get him to do anything. Like he's told the story before of like hiding in the closet and like the staff having to like discover him and pull him out and force him to go to group. And I was placed in his group. Like, so he was essentially a new group member by the time I got there. So even though he'd been there for months.
My favorite thing about Chris is you go to the meal, he's not at the meal, and then you show up like you're walking through whatever, the treatment center, and you walk past the cafeteria and he's like the only person in the cafeteria eating cereal, and he's like, hey,
my memories of Chris, I got to Mountainside also in May, end of May, and Dave, we overlapped for like a day or two or something. I just remember I remember getting there and seeing, I was like, who's this super cool guy playing the guitar in front of everybody? It was like my first day at Mountainside. You were like jamming out guitar, everyone like loved you.
You were like, this guy's fucking annoying as fuck.
And anyway, Chris, he was in phase 4. That's like the step down extended care kind of program once you're done with like the initial 4 weeks or whatever. But I just always remember, and everyone, there's like, Chris was notorious. He always walked around with this like smile on his face, just kind of like off in space smiling. And we always laugh because like my wife, she always says that when she first met Chris, she was like, genuinely didn't know. She's like, is he retarded? Like, it's like that was her first. Once she talked to him, obviously, Chris is not. He's such a amazing person to talk to. He's clearly not retarded. But that was like her visually. She just kind of see him just kind of like always like smiling, staring off into space. She like thought he was like special needs, and so we always laugh about that. She would always tell him that too. This joke they had.
He might be though. He might be.
A little bit.
He might have been
sure.
special needs.
Yeah.
It's so funny to it's so funny and it's so tragic because you go over all these things about Chris, like the fact that he wouldn't go to group until they dragged him to group, or that Michelle thought he was special needs or retarded, which I appreciate. But then the tragedy, it's really funny when he's alive, because it's like he's like the most bright beacon, of a human. Like, one of the reasons that we talk about him like this is because he was so special. He drew people in. I still get emails from people that never met him, that were in love with him just from listening to him on the show, and felt so connected to him. And so you add up all those things, and it's like the guy who wouldn't go to group and the guy who seemed special needs is no longer with us now, and it becomes like, oh my God, like we didn't see it coming almost. And it's, I don't mean to get serious or sad, but when we go over it, when he's here, it's really funny, and it's kind of funny because he's always here with us. But since now he's gone a long time, and when you add up all the facts, it's like that's what fucking can happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or is that short-sighted of me and cryptic, Colin?
I don't think so. I mean, there's like many different layers of like the grief process with him, and I'm like a master compartmentalizing person. So I will not connect to that at all, really, until like random moments. And what I often think about is like what Ted was just talking about, was just like the times that we did spend with him, and like the times in phase 4 when the three of us were like and I'm sure he talked about phase 4 all the time, but like just like the absolute debauchery that happened there, and it's like this like true like feeling like Ted and Chris like being a part of my like step into recovery this time around, like it kept me there. It kept me staying because of how like ridiculous Chris was, and also like just like incredibly kind, and just like really unique, and like just generating stories. Like every single week there was like some type of experience that we'd have with Chris that was just like unlike anybody else, and that's just like who he was. And it's like why you guys started a podcast, because he just has endless amounts of stories, situations that he would get himself in, conversations that he'd have that like was just really unique to like unlike anybody else that I really knew.
Well, he loved making a mountain out of a molehill. Like if something happened, I'm the same way. Like if anything happens, he like loved to tell the story. And when you say you got into phase 4 and it was endless debauchery with Ted and Chris, give us a little
well, like
sampling.
What comes to mind to me immediately is like right when I got to phase 4, Chris and I like we connected over like, I don't know if you guys remember these. There was a thing, soundboards, where you'd use to prank phone call people. It was like a bunch of, like, we had these like Matt Damon soundboards, Arnold Schwarzeneggers. We went in this phase where we were spending hours every day just who can we prank phone call, pretending like we're Arnold Schwarzenegger or Matt Damon or whoever. And we were just like doing the rounds of all the, and then it got out of hand. There was one soundboard. There's a movie called like Phone Booth, I think. I didn't even see it, but it's like someone's in a phone booth and there's apparently like a sniper ready to like kill them. And so there's all these clips of it. And we're like, let's use the
They can't get
and
off
you can't get off the ones.
off
We're like,
the
let's use the
phone.
soundboard from that. We like prank phone called some like retirement center, and it was like all these clips of like, you move an inch, we're gonna kill you, and like we built it up to where the point where they like believed it was like a person, and then finally we're like, tell them we're gonna kill them, and then the people were freaking out. We're like, all right, this is like, we took this a little too far. Like it was getting out of control. But we have a great one that our friend Dave Marshall, who unfortunately also, he's been on the show. He overdosed years ago and he died, but he got a clip of me and Chris doing a Matt Damon soundboard to I don't know who, but that's just the type of shit. Like every day we were just it's on Facebook. It's hysterical.
Send it.
Yeah,
to
you
me.
should. It's hysterical. Like we got this guy
Yeah.
on the phone for like 2.5 minutes at least, maybe 3 minutes, until finally it became super obvious. But that's just like the everyday type of shit. An example of things we like to, or Chris just love to do.
Yeah, he led the charge on that. We were calling the intake desk at Mountainside from phase 4.
Yeah,
With the soundboard.
It was so stupid. It was just so fun. Like,
Well,
Yeah.
he came on the show one time and he's like, I have this amazing thing that I came up with where I call a Chinese food restaurant and then I call another Chinese food restaurant.
he
and I
called
put
me
them
one
on the
time. He
phone
got two
together.
Chinese phone
Yep.
restaurants on the phone and told them to hold on. And then he called me and I answered the phone like, hello? And they're both like, hello? Hello? And I'm just like, what the fuck's going on? Like, and they were going back and forth and I was like, who am I talking to? And they were confused and I was confused and yeah.
Well, it was
Yeah,
a very
yeah.
famous Howard Stern bit, and I tried to tell
No,
Chris
no,
that.
it's like
and he's
Jerky
like, no, I
Boys or
invented it."
something. But he loved it. He did it all the time. He would like
Yeah.
regularly do that.
He
Yeah.
was so fun and stupid and loved to be fun and stupid. And he was
Yeah.
also so smart that
Yeah.
he loved to see himself be dumb
Yeah.
and young and fun.
My
Like, that's
wife and
when
I
it
were
got
cracking
so
up the other
intoxicating.
day because I was like,
Totally.
remember that time when like Chris had invited a whole bunch of us out to dinner? Like his sister Arden was coming to town and he invited like 15 people or something, and including what's that
It was for his year.
for his year?
It
Okay,
was for his year anniversary.
yeah,
First,
and invited
yeah.
a ton of people to dinner.
Yeah.
And one of the people was Tim Walsh, who used to be the director of Mountainside, but then at this time he was the director of where my wife was working at Newport Academy, and he was like her boss and shit. And he's sending this text message out with everybody, and he and Michelle, my wife, like they loved each other. They loved to like give each other shit. And he's like, asking who's coming and stuff, and then out of nowhere, my wife's Italian, Michelle Ferrantino, and he's like, Michelle, is your spaghetti and asking to be there? And like, and it was just so funny, like out of nowhere, and he just like he loves to just like jab and attack. So we were always cracking up, and he loved to just like make fun of people, but in such an endearing way that like I feel like if anybody else said something like that to her, she'd be like so offended, but like because it was Chris, it's just like this like hysterical. He's so endearing and charming with it.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Colin? I'm sorry.
I have a funny story. This is before Ted came over. He was still an inpatient, and we were over at Phase 4, and so Phase 4 is the sober living. That was like right next to the inpatient program. It was a double wide trailer. It was like absolutely disgusting, but we loved it. And I was there with Chris, and it was like my first couple weeks there, and Mountainside would always do this camping trip, like up in the mountain behind Mountainside. And we, one night, like, Phase 4 was brutal. There was no internet, there was no cable. We just had old DVDs. Like, Ted and I would watch the Ali G show over and over and over again. And we had, like, no phones. It was, like, you had to find your own entertainment. So one night, like, it was like a Saturday night, me, Chris, and a buddy of ours who's also there, Andrew, were, like, just sitting around. And I was telling them a story about this animal that I grew up with called a Fisher cat. And I don't know if you know what that is, but it's like this weasel. And it makes this horrific sound of basically it sounds like a woman getting assaulted in the middle of the woods. It's like horrifying. And growing up, I would have to like put my headphones on because like if a Fisher cat would be outside of our house, it would just shriek all night and you like couldn't sleep. And Chris thought this was like hilarious. We ended up, I think there was like one area where we did have like internet connection. He like went on his phone and he found the sound of this Fisher cat, and we came up with this plan to take like the MP3 file of the Fisher cat sound, and our friend Andrew had a speaker, like a portable speaker, and we put it on his MP3 player. And the next weekend when like all of like Mountainside was doing the camping trip, there was like 30 people up there, like newly sober, like some people camping for the first time ever coming up from the city. We like army crawled in the middle of the night up to the base of the camp. It was like halfway up the mountain with the portable speaker, and we just played that shrieking Fisher cat sound for like 10 minutes, and it created panic in the whole campsite, and people had to get escorted down. Like there were people that didn't want to camp anymore, and it like completely ruined the trip. And it was like one of those things that was just like, Chris like devised this plan, and like at the time, just like the phone booth thing, it was like hilarious in the moment. But we get back down, I'm like, fuck, we're gonna get kicked out of our sober house because of like we just like ruined the like clinical experience of like people and inpatient. But
And it made Chris very happy.
Did they find out?
Oh yeah.
Did they find out it was you?
We told them after we had moved out. I think we told a few people that worked there that like no longer ran the like the MBS program or whatever, that we did that, and like they like kind of laughed, but we're not like super happy. But Chris always thought it was funny.
And I bet Chris always wanted to tell the story so he could like the legendary thing that you guys did to fucking destroy their spiritual experience.
It's so funny, like the type of shit that like Chris and honestly myself too, that we would like find funny that other people wouldn't. I have this random memory when I worked at Kripalu with Chris, this like yoga retreat center, right? And Chris used to work, and he would like fill the food up in the lines, and it was like this big buffet kind of that you would go and get food. And speaking of Tim Walsh, his wife Kim Walsh was there. And she walked up, and Chris was like apparently walking up and down the lines like farting, and she's like, "Hey Chris, like what are you doing?" And he's like walking by the food. He's like, "Oh, just crop dust in the food." And he like thought she would like get a big chuckle out of it, and she was like really like upset. She's like, "That's like disgusting." Like so,
Hold on.
He's like, "What is the food he's supposed to be he's supposed to be restocking?" And he's like walking up and down the lines, just like crop dusting the food, and he thought Kim, this like woman who's just here to eat the food, would like find humor in that. And so he's like, "Oh, just crop dust," and he's like matter of fact, and she just.
But how did she know that he was farting on the food?
Like, she said, "Hey Chris, it was good to see you. Like, I haven't seen her. Like, what are you up to?" And he's like, just crop dusting on the food. And like he thought that in his mind this was like so funny, she was just like, she was like straight faced, like that's disgusting, like don't do that, like stern with him.
Well, he had a weird, like he loved really juvenile, gross stuff. Like he would, in the early episodes of the show, he would burp in the middle of the show, and I would get so angry because it just like it would for me, it would undo the show. It sounded horrible, and I just would get so mad. I would get really angry, and he would do it anyway. And or I remember like somebody else got angry because I think he farted into the mic on the show once, and then he like said he's blowing a kiss from his anus to the.
See, that's why. Like, I think that's part of the reason. Like, I'm the same way. Like, I think that stuff's so funny. Like, I totally understand why that's like ruins the show. You're burping into the mic, so like I get that piece of it. But I think like I just like really connected with Chris on like this like ridiculous level of humor that a lot of people were just like, that's gross. That's not funny. Like, don't do that. And like he kind of had the same thing, and so like when we kind of both experienced a moment like that, it was so funny to like laugh with someone else who just found this stupid juvenile stuff so funny, and then it just like amplifies it because someone else thinks it's funny,
Yeah, I mean it's funny to me because I was such a bitch about it, and like, but that was funny also. Like hating it so much and him wanting to upset me, and him, like that whole dynamic. I can't help but think about like when you guys got sober, like early sober that first time. I know you guys had a lot of fun and a lot of laughs, but would you talk about like you guys stayed sober? The two of you didn't ever do it again. Would you talk about like how meaningful it was to get sober? Like, where was early sobriety for you?
Like, you mean with Chris or just in general?
In general.
Yeah,
in general.
I think and with Chris.
And with Chris.
I think for sure we had lots of fun, lots of, juvenile laughs, ridiculous stuff. But I think that's part of the reason why we all connected so hard. At the same time, like, while we had so much fun, like, all of us really wanted to be sober. Like, I was at this, I was 23, but I was using drugs since I was 13, and 23 is still really young, but for whatever reason in my life, I was so done with using drugs that I, like, really wanted to be sober. And so, like, I had this, like, level of, like, I took it pretty serious at the same time, and I think Colin had some of that, and Chris did too. And so we were able to like be super silly with each other, but at the same time like connect over the fact that like this is like super important shit. You know, we'd go to meetings together, we would talk about like certain self-help books together, whatever, but like I think we all really connected over like taking it pretty serious. So it was like a very meaningful thing. You know, had it been like a year or two prior, I wouldn't have cared so much about the seriousness of like my sobriety, you know what I mean? So yeah, it was super meaningful for me. And I think just seeing like young people like being sober, like that was like mind blowing to me. Like I had never, you know, I was trying to get sober, and I was, I think 22 the first time I went to Mountainside, or maybe I was 23. And, it had never like crossed my mind that like that was actually an option, that like I could be like a young person and have fun and be sober, but like seeing that and seeing, you know, this community of other people doing it was super meaningful for me.
Totally.
What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I came into Mountainside and met Ted and Chris pretty broken, and there wasn't a lot of humor and in getting to that point. And I think that Chris and Ted, in a lot of ways, there's like this perfect combination of being able to like talk about these things in like a humorous and like lighthearted way, but also like understanding the seriousness of it. Ted specifically, I mean, when I first met Ted, we were playing ping pong, and he had previously been to Mountainside like 6 months prior to that, and like immediately relapsed. And he told me that story, and like at that time I was like, I was just at Mountainside. I was like living in the woods, and then ended up in treatment. So like the idea of like just being in a bed and eating regular food, regular meals, that's all I really cared about. It was like hard for me to even process the idea of recovery.
What do you mean? Hold up. What do you mean? I don't remember this. What do you mean you were
I was in
Slow down for a minute.
Before I came to Mountainside, I ended up like living underneath a picnic table in a state park in Vermont. And I was like partly disassociating, because at that time I was like ingesting a lot of pharmaceuticals that I was stealing off the back of a delivery truck, and I really had no idea like what I was taking. So I was like taking.
Do you have any idea now what you were taking?
To be honest, it was like a mixture of opiates and chemo meds. It's like I like would put. I don't even know, to be honest. Like it was, I would just snort every single thing that I would put like towards the end. And I was drinking, and I had gotten kicked out of this kid's house, this like complete like degenerate kid's house who like didn't trust me anymore. Like that's like where I was at, where like that guy didn't trust me to like live in his house. So I burnt all bridges, and I just like went into like this kind of like, I'm gonna do this walkabout, like self-reliant. I remember reading Self-Reliance and like thinking that I could just like live in the woods and like find myself, which turned into like suicidal ideations and like disassociating. I was like fishing and like cooking fish on a fire. And then I'd like meander down into town and steal from this pharmacy delivery truck, and like scrounge up some money to get a bottle of vodka and go back up in the woods. So that's how I ended up at Mountainside. I basically woke up one day and I was like, I'm either going to die. I was like emaciated. I had shattered my collarbone, and I ended up asking for help. So the discrepancy from that to Mountainside was like a med spa. And like it was
the jovial fun.
Totally. And I mean, it's like I met Ted, we're playing ping pong, I'm smoking cigarettes, and like the like seriousness of it slipped away pretty fast until I met Ted, and Ted told me about like his experience over the last like 8 months, and was like, I'm gonna do whatever they tell me to do, because like I didn't do that last time, and I'm back here, and I don't want to end up back here. So I ran with that, and then like in combination with Chris's unseriousness, but also like this underlying darkness of like him telling some pretty horrific shit about his life. Like that combination of like friendships that I had in the beginning, I think allowed me to like get on board with like, I'll do whatever they tell me to do. And that's how I ended up at phase 4. So.
And Ted, can you share any of those months that Colin is talking about?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I went to Mountainside twice, and I think towards the end of my use, like I just knew that it was going to end up in rehab. I was just like, there's no way I can stop on my own, right? Went the first time, but I wasn't like really set on this idea of like giving up drugs and alcohol. I was just like, I need to go to rehab. It was like I just knew that what I was doing wasn't working. I need to go to rehab. But the idea of like being sober for my entire life, all that, like I wasn't not like a reality. I mean, when I went to mountains, I remember hearing all this idea of like sobriety, and I just like would kind of play along like, yeah, I'm gonna do that, right? But like in the back of my mind, I knew that wasn't gonna happen. I wasn't like consciously like, oh, I can't wait to do drugs. I kind of told myself maybe I'll try to do this, whatever. But I left Mountainside the first time, and like with, and this is out in Connecticut. I was living in Michigan at the time, and I was, what was I taking, like a train to New York to fly back? I don't even remember, but I got dropped off at like a train station. I can't even remember how I got there. But I guess the whole point is here, within like an hour, or maybe not even an hour, within like 30 minutes, I went and bought like a pint of some liquor, some vodka or something, immediately, and just started drinking that. But I was like, for me, I was like, alcohol isn't really my problem. Like, it's fine. And then, the minute I got back home, just got back into all the same shit. And then it just spiraled and got even worse. Another 6 months went by. And then I just remembered the first time I was at Mountainside. Like I said, that was the first time. I remember meeting, we have a friend who I'm still good friends with, Jeffy, right? I don't know, do you know who Jeff Goldman? Yeah. Yeah, so he worked at Mountainside at the time, and he was even younger than I was, like a year or two younger, but he was sober and he was just like a cool dude, had it all together. And I remember thinking, like, how is this possible? I remember going to these like, young people's meetings. So that was like the first time I saw that there were like people in their 20s who were just young and sober. And so when I went back and relapsed and everything, and my life just spiraled out of control again, like I knew that was an option. And I like wanted to be sober so bad. I think that like I don't know why, I just did. For a lot of drug addicts, like not everyone really wants that. And I think that's what made for me my recovery like easier than I think for a lot of people, even though it was still really hard for a lot of periods of time. But like I just so deeply wanted to live like a happy, sober life where I was like pursuing my life. I just couldn't do it. You know what I mean? Like I wanted it so bad I could not do it. And then that's why I was like, I need to go back there, and I'm just going to do whatever the hell they tell me to do because I want this so bad. I even have this memory of like being in a group at Mountainside the second time I was there, and I knew I really wanted it. And my our therapist at the time, Tanya Beecher, awesome woman, she had us do this like polarity exercise where she's like, all right, on a scale of like 1 to 100, I want everyone to stand in the room based on like how bad they or what their desire is to continue using drugs. Like if you have a full desire, stand at this side of the room. If you have a 0 desire, stand at that side of the room. And I was literally the only person in my group. I remember I was like 0. Like I do not ever want to do this again. I was like the only person standing in the very back of the room. And I think there was people looking at me like, you're full of shit, dude. Like didn't believe me. But I was like, no, I just don't, this is horrible. I don't want to do this anymore. And so for whatever reason, I just like, I wanted it so bad. And I'm still sober. First, I don't know why that desire was there, but it's just part of me. And so, that's why I was like, I'm just going to do whatever the hell they tell me to do. And I did. And yeah.
I think that's so brilliant, though. I mean, Colin obviously works in the field, like, since then, basically. And that's all you really need is what Ted just described. When I was at Mountainside, I think I had my daughter was 13 months old, and I didn't really want to get sober. Like I was probably in the middle of the room. I remember the exercise. I wasn't with you, but we did it with whatever group I was in. I don't even remember the name of my therapist. But I was in the middle of the room because I really didn't want to be sober. I went home from Mountainside at 30 days, and I found a new needle in a bag from Forbidden Planet, and I was like, I have a new needle. I'm going to get high. And I got high, and I hadn't done heroin in 30 days, maybe 40 days, because I'd been to detox. I got really sick, and then the only way I was going to get custody back was if I passed a hair test. And I didn't do heroin again. I smoked weed a couple times that week, and I was like, then I need to pass the hair test. So I just stopped using because I was so afraid of the hair test. But, Colin, how often do you stumble upon somebody like Ted that is so certain when they get to treatment that they really know that they want?
I would say it does happen, and like, it happens more often than you would think. But I would say that what's more common is like there is a desire for change. And a lot of people don't know what that change necessarily looks like. And it's not always like a complete, like, abstinence is what I desire, right? But like there is a desire for some type of shift in like what it was like to, like they were tired of what their lives had been like, and they are having a tough time finding out what that change looks like. And that's a category that I found myself in. Like, I knew that I needed to make a change. I didn't know what that looked like. Like, you walk into a 12-step meeting and abstinence, that's what they talk about. And for a while, it like wasn't necessarily that. Like, I had ideas of going back and smoking weed. Opiates were a huge problem. Drinking was definitely a problem for me too. But I just like, it was hard for me to even conceptualize like any plans of the future. And I get a lot of guys in the house that are there for a reason because they want their lives to be different, and it's my job to like help them kind of parse that out and figure out what that actually looks like. And for some people it's like going back and moderating with certain things, but what the number one thing that really stands out is a desire for connection. Because, I mean, for addiction, for me, like, I just lost connection to humans, to people, to family. And I just really wanted a human connection that felt real, that wasn't transactional, that was, like, genuine. And I found that when I met Ted and Chris, and the foundation started from there. Like, I didn't have to have the answers. I didn't have to commit to long-term sobriety. I didn't think I would be here where I am today, but I just knew that I wanted that connection desperately, to have people in my life that I really cared about and I knew really cared about me and that I could rely on. And I think that's just like human experience, but with somebody who struggles with substances, like that's, we lose it's alien, and we lose those things, or we never had them in the first place,
Two quick things. First of all, plug the place you work.
I work at Berkshire Transition Network. It's
Berkshire Transition Network. It's an amazing place.
It's in Great Barrington.
Because people, and
Dylan came on here. Dylan and I started it like a decade ago, and
he did a horrible job of plugging the place.
I mean, he hates marketing.
Show, so I'm giving you the opportunity.
Marketing dance.
I know. So just take a second and
I think that BTN, Berkshire Transition Network, but I think it was like created based off the relationships that we all formed in the early days of getting sober. Like, that connection is what is key. And like, obviously, like, recovery is important. Abstinence for a lot of people is a life and death type of thing, but not everybody. And what we really focus on is that like relational connection to the people that come in, that move in. It's not just, a lot of guys stay for months at a time. It's not like a 30-day program. It's transitional living. So we form relationships with these guys. Like, I've had guys that came to my wedding. I've had guys that I text with that lived there 9 years ago that are telling me about different experiences in their lives, whether that's good or bad. But like that, the connection is what matters to people, and that's something that we really focus on. I mean, every Friday, Ted's playing now that he's done with work for the summer. But like every Friday, we play volleyball at 1:00 at the houses, and it's some guys that live there, a lot of guys that work there, and a lot of guys from the community like Ted, and guys that had lived there like years and years ago that just come and show up, and they come and hang out. And it's like a form of like camaraderie and connection that like I think is pretty unique to a lot of places.
It's having fun. It's like it's the purpose
Yeah.
of having fun. Now I want to open up another thing. Like when you guys talk about yourselves and why it did work, and I know you can't answer this question, but you were there the whole time. Why didn't it work for Chris in your best understanding?
It's a big one.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I mean, I don't have an answer to that. And I think a lot of it is like really situational. I like think about this story often. I was talking with Ted about it earlier. Like I was about a year sober. We were living together, the three of us, me, Ted, and Chris, after having lived in the sober living place. And I was I was like kind of distancing myself from AA. I'd gotten the year coin. I like kind of had an I got it feeling. And I was at a laundromat because we didn't have washer and dryer. And I was sitting in the laundromat. Like I was actually reading the big book because I got a new sponsor and he was having me read like one of the stories or whatever. And a storm was coming in. And I go to take all my laundry out of the dryer. I throw it in the hamper, and I sprint to my car. And I sit I get in the driver's seat, and it's pouring out. And I go to reach for this jacket that I had washed that was in the hamper. And when I pulled the jacket out, a little baggie of white powder landed in my center console. And it was like damp and wet. I don't even know what it was. It was either coke or heroin. I don't really know what it was, but it was definitely drugs. And it had gotten.
Are you sure it wasn't some
No.
kind of laundry detergent that you had decided
No,
to
there was
put
like a
in
little
your
like
bag?
smiley face thing in the corner. It had been left there from somebody else. It must have fallen out of somebody's pocket in the dryer. And I sat there, and my immediate thought was, I'm going to take this. I'm going to go up to my hometown. My grandpa's place is empty. I'm going to do some of it, and I'm going to leave the bag there and just do a little bit of it. Like, just the plans immediately just, like, started generating of, like, I'm going to do a little bit at a time. Like, when I have a tough time, I'm going to go up there. I'm going to use some of it and come back down. And long story short, like, I sat there with it for, like, 10 minutes, and for whatever reason, I decided to call Ted. I tried calling my sponsor. He didn't answer. And I decided to call Ted. And Ted immediately, he gets on the phone. He was like, drive to the apartment, stay on the phone with me, throw it out the window, and like, just get here. And I like drove there. I get to the apartment. I walk upstairs. And I think, I was telling Ted this, like, I think that Ted didn't fully believe me that I didn't use anything.
No, I definitely believe you.
Because I was like sweating and then Ted, like being the like, of the same thought process that I had. He asked me, he's like, do you know where you threw the baggie? And I was like, I just threw it out the window. He's like, do you know exactly where it is? And I was like, yeah, I threw it under the tree in front of the supermarket. And he's like, we're going back there and we're dumping it out. Because Ted was like, that's what I would do. I would throw drugs out and then I'd return back to them. So, yeah. So we ended up driving back together. And, like, in the pouring rain, like, grabbed this baggie and, like, ceremoniously just dumped it in a puddle. And, like, I think about that story a lot. Like, what if I didn't call? And I don't know why. I don't know why I called. I had a plan, and I wanted to do that plan, and I felt like the dopamine was, like, kicking in of, like, before even using it, you know? But for whatever reason, I called, and I think it's really just situational, and that's why, like, I mean, I can go on a whole, like, tangent on, like, the importance of, like, staying consistent, whether it's, like, with 12-step stuff, whether it's from a therapeutic lens, whether it's just, like, socially, just staying connected and being open to the people that are in your life, like, for those times where you need to make a phone call, where it could decide, like, some really serious implications in your life. And I think about, like, Chris and the injury that he had and not calling anybody. And I mean, I spent a bunch of time with Chris from that time up until 2 days before he died. I went out to eat with him right before he died in Boston. And there were a lot of opportunities for him to, like, do the same thing I did with that baggie. And he didn't. And I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. So.
Let's talk about that for a second, because like I wasn't in I was in his company one time in that period just before he died, when we did the Artie Lang
Mm-hmm.
interview, and he looked horrible. I mean, the pictures, he looks horrible. I remember he looked horrible, but he had taken a bus from Great Barrington. You know, I met him at Port Authority or whatever, and I remember. Did you call me, Colin, to say that he had said he? Who called me to say that he had said that he told Dylan that he spoke to him, but it was me, or he got us confused
Yeah,
somehow?
I was
Remember the
with
story?
Dylan when he took that call, where there was like some weirdness where he was like confused on the phone. And I don't know if Dylan ended up calling you or I called or
No, it was
Ryan.
Ryan. I think it must have
Yeah.
been Ryan.
And like,
So,
Yeah.
like in that, go
and I
ahead,
think
please.
about that a lot. And I guess the biggest question that I have, and something that I often wrestle with, is like, at what point do you give somebody the respect of like believing them when they're in recovery, you know? And like at that time, he had like 4 years sober, and like we had a follow up conversation with him like an hour later, and he was completely with it. He said he was sleep deprived, he was doing a sober companion case, all these things, and like we we believed him, you know, and like I I don't feel regret during those months. He was also getting drug tested pretty regularly, so there's like that piece of it. Um, but like, at what point do you start to believe and like trust the people who are in your life that are in recovery? You know, and like that's a family question as well. Like, if I have a child,
We did
yeah.
a whole show. We did a whole
Hmm.
show about it, where I apologized to him
Yeah.
for challenging him on his sobriety, and being like, and totally co-signing everything he said. And then the listeners, you know, up to this day are writing me, "You're a fucking idiot." Like, we knew he was high, and no, and none of them were having lunch with him, or none of them were on the phone with him every day. None of them were making a podcast, and somehow every fucking brilliant person in Dopey Nation knew exactly what he was using to the day he died, and we, as his closest friends, decided to
And
give him that
it's
faith
so
and
hard
trust and
because
belief.
like Chris was incredibly smart. He's incredibly good with words. Everyone knows that like addicts can be very convincing. I think we all had this intuitive hunch, but it's so hard in the moment. I think when you're outside and you're listening to episodes and you already know what happened, it's so obvious. But when you're in the moment with someone, it's entirely different. I mean, we've all been there. And it makes me think about like, you know, when I shared earlier about how like I wanted it so bad and so I was able to stay sober, and Dave, you were asking Colin about that. I think it is common that people really want it. They have this strong desire. They want to be sober, whatever it is. I think that what is very difficult for most people, and I've definitely experienced it myself, is that like things happen, life happens, you get dysregulated, shit happens, you get upset about something, you get in a fight, you know, and it's like in those moments where like you're feeling heavy emotion, your brain just gets like rewired, and it's just those like those little tiny moments where like you make that decision, like Colin said, you don't make that phone call to call me or to call whoever, and you act out of impulse, and it's like that's what fucks people. And it's just like it's like learning how, like the importance of like learning how to compose, to regulate yourself, to catch yourself when your thoughts start going, to catch yourself when you're having an emotional reaction. That's not just what like addicts, but like most people in the world have a hard time maintaining composure over sort of like their internal state. And I think for like an addict, someone in recovery, they think want to be sober so bad, shit happens, you start getting a little, you know, worked up, and then before you know it, you're just back in that like, it's almost like I think for addicts it's like a trauma response. You just go back to this like internal place of desperation where you're not even thinking clearly, you're not using your brain properly, and you just make these decisions. And so for whatever reason, whatever's going on in Chris's life, that like in those moments where yeah, it's like you wish you could go back and, you know, he made a different decision, but he just, you know, he acted in that way that wasn't using the tools, the resources, and yeah, we don't know why, and so it's hard to put your finger on it, but I mean, he clearly had the desire, he wanted to be sober.
He wanted to be sober. The thing, and I haven't. I was going over this yearly and it was making me kind of crazy because there's nothing we can
No.
do to go back and change the outcome of what happened. Like when Colin tells the story of finding the drugs and calling you, the thing that I was thinking in my head was that's what recovery is. Recovery is every time we get to this place leaning into our recovery. And as long as we do, we keep it going. We keep the flame burning, and we can light the next flame with our flame, and
And I
very,
think,
very
oh,
beautiful.
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I have it open.
I think that it's also important
please.
to add too, where I feel like often we have this idealistic approach where if we had called him out, he would have changed, and that he would have been like, "You're right, guys. I need to seek treatment." And that's not always the case either. Like, it's easy to say that in hindsight, but it's also
We didn't know though. We didn't know.
I understand
if
that,
we
but
had
I'm
known,
saying
we would have
even
done
if
that.
we had known,
Like,
even if we had reached out, and Ted and I had this experience where we were fully aware that Chris was using, he was in our house using, and he was down in Brooklyn, he was bouncing all over the place, and like we had those conversations with him, and he did not want to get help until like the police got involved. So I'm just saying, like, there is this idealism of like, if we had known and we had sat him down and we did an intervention, he would have been like, "You guys are right, I'm going to treatment," or he would have shut his phone off and we wouldn't have heard from him. So like, we don't know what would have happened, whether we did or we didn't do something. I think fundamentally what is the most important thing is, again, going back to the connection piece. And this is something I do often in my work. Like, I have guys that do really well, that don't do really well. But I try my best to maintain openness and an open channel of communication, regardless of whether or not they're like abstaining from their substance, because I always want to be available for that time where they feel safe enough to actually want to reach out to me. And for whatever reason, Chris did not feel like he could do that in that moment. And maybe he was a week away, maybe he was a month away from getting to that point, and he just took something that didn't allow him that opportunity to do it,
the craziest thing was that he was going to get tested the next day. Like how hard that day, the day he died, they had a test scheduled for him. Like, that's insanity. And I also remember when Ryan called me to tell me that Chris sounded bad, Todd had just died. Todd had died like the week before. And I was out of my mind. I was waiting tables at Katz's, and I started texting Chris. I probably texted him 100 times when he didn't get back to me. Literally, over and over and over again. And when I finally talked to him, we talked when I left Katz's, and I was walking to Chelsea, and we talked for an hour, and he was like, "No, I'm not using, I'm fighting with my dad." Like, he crafted this long, detailed story about how his dad doesn't trust him, and and I was just like, he's alive, he's okay, he's not dead, and Todd was dead, and I was so traumatized by losing Todd. The idea of losing Chris was like, I couldn't handle it, and then ultimately I did, and it was crazy. It's such and like, when Ted, where were you when you found out?
I was at my house. It was this temporary place I was living over the summer, and Colin called me and told me. And it was just one of those. Grief is such a crazy thing because I've lost a few people in my life. Like, my dad passed away when I was a teenager, my stepdad a few years before Chris, and for some reason, I feel like grief kind of comes at various times. Sometimes you don't feel much at first, you feel it later. I know it was kind of like that with my dad and my stepdad. It was just this like weird, I was also younger then, but when I found out about Chris, it just like, I just immediately just like lost it. And for the next many months, it was like the hardest of all my like grief processes. It hit me by far the hardest. I could just think about it at any moment. I'm sure you guys can obviously relate, and just like break down into tears. And it just felt so hard. It was something about like a friend that you connect with so close. And but yeah, Colin told me, and then it was kind of this beautiful moment though. Obviously it's horrifically sad, but Colin told me, and then like a bunch of us, Colin referenced where he works at BTN, and they all knew Chris. Chris had worked there too, and we all met there, and there was like I don't know, 20 or 30 people there. Like immediately, everyone was just crying together all day. I mean, I literally remember spending an entire day surrounded by like Colin, Chris, Ryan, Dylan, you know, my wife was there, like everyone who knew Chris, and we were on the back little porch at 19, just sitting in chairs, all just like sobbing together, telling stories, just crying together for hours, just, you know. And I remember one of the first person I ran into when I pulled up was Jason, who unfortunately also died, how many years ago? 4 or 5 years ago, Colin. And, you know, I didn't even know him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, was he on the show? Okay.
He was on the show.
I knew Jason. I didn't know him super well, but, you know, I saw him and just immediately, like, went up to him and put my arms around him. He put my arms around me, and we just started, like, sobbing together. And so just, like, a day of just constant crying. It was, like, my memory of it. And sharing memories and being with loved ones. But, yeah, it was hard.
Yeah.
And it's been 7 years, which is crazy, because I have a 7-year-old daughter. My daughter was born 2 months before he died, you know, a month before Todd died. And the show is, you know, it was his show. The stupid podcast is Chris's podcast. And all these people came together around his death. And you know, I was talking to a woman who's deep in Dopey, and she was talking about like why the community is so tight, and she was talking about and she used the term the trauma bond of Chris's death, and then also you mentioned Dave Marshall. Dave Marshall was the first person in our community that died. He built our Facebook page. Dave Marshall, you know, he was like he came to record with me and Chris in Manhattan. They went to see Dave Attell, I think, at Comedy Cellar, and Artie Lang showed up, and I didn't go. And then we recorded a podcast, me, Chris, and Dave Marshall, and me and Chris got in this crazy fight, and we just started like a really angry, weird fight that didn't make any sense. Probably because I think Chris was trying to impress Dave Marshall, and I wasn't having it, and it turned into this crazy fight, and the show got lost.
I remember
like
that,
we never heard it. Yeah, it was really funny. But so people talk about our audience being trauma bonded by these deaths and then by COVID. And I don't know, there's, you know, 7 years is a long period of time, and I haven't had a lengthy conversation. I did last summer with Chris's mother and his sister, which is a much different kind of conversation, right? And they were not aware, like Chris's mom was not really aware of what Dopey was, really, and that Chris is still alive in people's ears, like now people listen to Chris all the time. He's alive in those episodes, and it's powerful and weird. But as time goes on, like, how do you guys experience grief around somebody who was such a close
I still think about, I say this with like genuine sincerity, I think about Chris all the time. There are so many things that, like, I mentioned earlier my juvenile sense of humor, whatever, other things that I find so silly and so funny that, like, most people wouldn't, but I know Chris would. And, like, I literally feel like sometimes I'm laughing with him at various just, like, stupid little things. And I find myself sometimes cracking up to myself and just thinking about Chris, knowing he'd be dying at the same thing right now. So, like, I have these moments, and I always think about it. My wife and I always bring up Chris stories. And, you know, what's funny is, like, I have I've always had, like, really vivid dreams, and I have, like, I frequently have Chris in my dreams. And it could be anything and everything. But I frequently have these, like, vivid dreams where he's in them, and I wake up the next morning and I'm like, I was just with Chris. Like, it sounds crazy, but I feel it. And so, I don't know. Like, Michelle and I...
Tell us about one of your vivid
I
dreams,
had
please.
an interesting one. It was like a year ago, and it was really weird. In my dream, I was back at Mountainside, and Chris was there, and I almost like relived my sobriety, but it was very focused around my wife and I. Chris was like facilitating it, right? He was like, it was like, you know, you hear like Ebenezer Scrooge or whatever, when he dies, the ghost, he relives his life. it was like sort of like that, and like Chris was like the role of the person like walking me through my like, but it was like really geared towards my wife and I. Like we like relived all the experiences we had together when we first like met each other, we fell in love, and all the adventures we went on. But like Chris was like guiding us through the whole thing, and so it was like from the moment I left Mountainside to when I met my wife, and to like all the things we did in sort of like the family we built. But like Chris was like the integral part of it. Like it's very, very odd, but that's an example of one. And that was like such a powerful dream for me that I woke up the next morning, I was actually like tearing up thinking about just all of it, and it was very like focused on him and sort of like facilitating this. And I don't know what the meaning behind any of that is, but that's just one example. But he's frequently in my dreams.
I think that's really cool though, because like that's like a role that he could play in the dream. And like the dreams that I've had with Chris, he's known he's
Dude,
dead.
I've had that like same shit.
Like
sorry to cut you off, but I've had the same shit. Yeah.
It's no, please cut me off. All the whatever you guys want to cut me off, please cut me off. But fun, because it's weird to do it remotely at all, because like interruption is very important in Dopey, I think. But interrupting digitally is weird. But he's always dead in the dream, and he's always like, I had a dream recently with him and my mother's also dead. But for some reason, her being in the dream wasn't as monumentally as him being in the dream. And he always comments that he's not here anymore in the dream, which is really weird and painful. It's like the other thing is like around addiction, like a lot of people died. You mentioned Jason, you mentioned Dave Marshall, Todd, all these. I mean, then there's a ton of other people. Like they're finding that the trend of death is changing now, and Colin, I'm sure, can speak to this a lot. Are you seeing much less deaths?
Definitely am. It's weird. I won't get into details because I didn't know this person as well. But I heard somebody that I was in recovery with a couple of years ago took her life. I have noticed that being a thing that's happening more frequently, where it's less overdoses and it's more of that. And suicide. I know I keep like
more suicide
beating this drum, but like when I think about Chris every single day, because I stepped foot into the house that he lived in. The board games that we used to play, Settlers of Catan, are still in that house. The room that
is the scoreboard still in that house?
Log. It was
the scoreboard.
Yeah, it was lost. We can't find it. I think it's like buried somewhere in the. I don't know. I always try to look for it.
Wait, I just want to interrupt real quick. The funny point in that, like this scoreboard I'm talking. We used to play Settlers of Catan all the time. And Chris was. It's like this board game where you build a settlement, you take over the other opponents, and we were all so competitive. And there was like a handful of us who were pretty good, right? And we kept this scoreboard of who had the most wins and losses. But
it was a literal log.
Is he'd wait till we're all gone. Yeah, it was on a wooden log. He would all the new people at the house who didn't know how to play, he'd sit down with them and organize a game, and he'd crush them every time, and then mark his wins on the log. So he'd stack his stats. We have like a picture of this on Facebook. He's got all these wins. Yeah. I'm like, dude, those don't count. Those are against people who don't know how to play. And he'd rub it in all the time how good he was.
And like Ted and I would be at work, and Ted would just be like, and Chris would just be home, just like racking up his stats.
We're like, dude, those do not count. He put them on the official log, and
So like I think about him every day in that sense, and like it like comes back to like the connection piece, like that. I like whether you're sober or you're not, or like where you're at and like the whatever stages of change, like everybody wants, like that's in this type of world and in the Dopey universe, like wants connection. And I think that's like why Dopey grew, like you mentioned COVID, like being able to have those meetings and to connect with people and to share stories and to not feel alone. Like Chris was that for me,
Do you think he felt very alone when he relapsed? Or do you think, I mean, my theory at the time, and I haven't really looked back at it because I don't have any more information, but my theory at the time was he had just finished the master's part of his PsyD. Him and Annie were, in a very, good relationship and having a nice place, and she was in Harvard, and all of a sudden, like, Dopey was doing pretty well. His role at BTN was kind of coming together. Arden trusted him. He was getting these high paying
companion gigs,
whatever you call it. Thank you, companion gigs. And that's when he fucked it. And then he got hurt, and that's when he relapses. And the story I always told myself, and probably said on Dopey 10 times, was that he felt like the promises would be much better if he got to get high and experience them at the same time. Like, that was my interpretation, imagining Chris, because he loved getting high. And we would talk about all the time that we would have probably died if fentanyl had been out when we were using. And I know that he was way more into, like, esoteric chemistry than I was. I like to get high. I didn't really care what it was. I didn't need to check every box of every substance, but he wanted to know everything about everything. So, like, I think he always really wanted to experience fentanyl.
Yeah.
I guess he had done fentanyl analgesic patches, though. I don't know. So, like, do you think he was very lonely, or do you think he just wanted to get
thought about this a lot. I think that him revealing to the people that he was closest to, like, revealing that he had been using, I think he was really afraid of losing those connections. And whether, like, I know that not to be true. Like, if he told me, it wouldn't have changed a thing. But I think there was this fear with the relationship that he was in, like, of losing that again, because he had experienced that in the past of losing it all, and I think that's, like, that's where we get into this whole kind of philosophy around, like, the expectation of abstinence and what that means, and I could go on forever about that, but, like, I hope that that's not the case, but I think a lot about that, and I question, like, was he afraid to tell us because he was afraid of losing the connections they had formed over the last however number of years?
I'm sure there's a big part of that. I also think that, like, Chris, I think a big part of Chris's, like, persona, and I remember talking to him about this, like, years later after he, got sober and we met, is, like, he loved, the thing with Chris is, like, everyone's like, oh, Chris doesn't care about anything, he doesn't care about anything. And he loved to, like, give off this vibe that he doesn't give a shit about anything. And I remember him telling me that he loved for people to also think he doesn't care about anything. He just kind of thought it was cool. And I think a lot of things he didn't care about, and that's what made him fun to be around. But I think deep down, he actually really did care about a lot of shit. And I think that he was in that relationship with Annie. We all know, like, relationships, they bring your shit up. And I feel like a lot of, like, deeply vulnerable personal stuff was likely coming up for him, that, like, he kind of pretended, like, I don't care about anything, I can just, whatever, feelings don't bother me, whatever. And I feel like that isn't true, and I think that lots of stuff was coming up for him, not, just because that's what happens in relationships. You look at your own vulnerabilities, your insecurities, you project onto other people, and so I feel like that probably, not saying it's the relationship, I think it's just he started feeling a lot of big emotions, and I feel like that factored into it as well. And I think what you said just now, Colin, is totally true. As is the case of anybody who's been sober, you never want to say, it's so hard to, like, admit you've relapsed when you've kind of have this identity of this sober person, you're doing this professional stuff, you're in graduate school. Of course, it's like your world crumbles, so he probably was just trying to hold it all in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, and everyone talks about the stigma, and the stigma of being a drug addict in recovery wasn't hard for him, but the stigma of losing the recovery, and the shame of not being this guy who's been through all this and cultivated all this recovery, I'm sure that was a huge piece of the whole thing. It's really it's nuts because, like, when we were talking in the beginning about our relationships with Chris, and my relationship with Chris started at Mountainside. It was whatever. It was like we had a bunch of laughs.
Briefly,
were you there
yeah.
when Francis was there, Colin? Yeah. So there's this guy Francis who introduced Chris to me as Freddie, and it was obvious. It was, they gave Chris a fake name, and it was obvious that it was, like, this inside joke. And I was like, and I was just getting off the heroin. And I was like, I don't really want to play this game, guys. Sorry. And I wound up becoming friends with Francis. He was this incredible guitar player, singer, weird fucking kid. And he left and he got high and he died while I think when I had just gotten out, and Chris called me. And then Chris would come to Katz's with his girlfriends to impress me and his girlfriends at the same time, because he wanted both sides of the impressing people. And then when I was, right when I got sober, Chris was the person who basically like was my whatever Eskimo. He was the person that showed me that AA could work. He was he was the person that I trusted to believe that 12-step could be something, and I called him every day. And he always, when I did The Last Jewish Waiter, he wanted to do something creative, and that's when I was like, why don't we do this stupid podcast? And he drove down from Great Barrington, and then from that day, which was probably October of 2015 to the day he died, we talked every day. We didn't, we texted or we talked, and I would be so obsessed with every aspect of Dopey, and he would act like he didn't care until I acted like I didn't care, and then all of a sudden he would get neurotic about everything, which was very reassuring, because of course he cared. He loved to say, it's whatevs. That was like the greatest Chris line ever. It's whatevs. But he cared so much about everything, which is why we love him so much, because he also cared that much about us. And he really cared about his relationships as much as he didn't want to. He didn't want to be that guy, but he was that guy. And I really appreciate the time that you guys are giving to talk about him. And
I mean, it's
what
a dark
was the story, Colin,
it's not
that you wanted to tell?
I mean,
Let's tell the story.
Because I'll let Ted start with the story, and I can chime in. But I think like this story, I think about this story a lot because, I mean, we're talking about like kind of the unseriousness of Chris in like this persona that he always put on of like the whatever type of like mentality. But like the experience of this story with Chris was, I think, really defines like who he was, in like a really deep way of like wanting to help and wanting to be there for the people that society like kind of left behind. And yeah, so Ted, I don't know if you want to start with the story and I'll jump in.
Yeah, sure. And it's funny, I can't even, I've told this story so many, it's so crazy, I've told it so many times over the years that I can't even remember if on one of the times we did a Dopey,
we never
if
did.
I told this. I can't remember.
We never did.
Okay, we never did. All right, well, whatever.
No, I'm not worried about it. I don't remember.
So this is maybe like we had been sober for a year or two. It was pretty early sobriety, and Chris and I, this is so random, but we were on our way to a poetry slam at Kripalu, the yoga retreat center. We used to where I served dishes, he served food. They're doing some like poetry slam. We were just like, let's. And go,
I was mad at those guys because I was going to the young people's meeting, and they were decided to skip it. So I decided I was going to go to the meeting, and they went off to slam poetry.
We went to a poetry slam, or we wanted to. And so we're driving down to Route 7, and all of the sudden in front of us, like we realize like there's this huge car accident. There's like 3 cars that are all like smashed right in the middle of the road, but there's no police. Like we quickly realized we were the first people on site for like a massive car accident. And so there's like smoke and there's glass and it's just like horrific. And we're like, what the fuck? So we pull over and we get out and we walk up and we're looking around at like the chaos. There was like one truck on top of a car, one car that was just kind of like smashed off to the side. We walk up and like the first window we look in, there's like this woman just like clearly dead, right? Like blood everywhere. It was horrific. And so we quickly realized like this is like serious. This wasn't just like a fender bender. Like this is horrific. And the truck's like up on top of her car. So she's there like bloody, like clearly died. I immediately just like was like, I went into shock. I was like, what the hell is going on? And so I just like couldn't, I was like, I kind of like dissociated. But Chris just kind of like had the opposite. He like jumped into action. We like walked around. There was another car and there was a guy who was like, help. His legs were like, the steering wheel were like smashed on his legs, and he was like, he was moaning like help. And Chris immediately is like, we're gonna get someone on, don't worry. And he calls 911 and lets them know like what's going on. And I'm just like, my head's spinning. I was just like, this is just like so much to take in. And then we hear there's a house that was off to the side, and we hear like a shout from the house, and this woman's like, he ran into the woods. And so apparently she must have been talking with like the driver, like, the person who was in the truck was like on top of another car. Yeah. And so Chris runs off there into the woods, and it's still, everything's so unclear what's going on. And then like the police show up. I'm just kind of like in a panic. I kind of blacked out, honestly. I don't even like remember all the details.
You ended up calling me, and it was only like a couple minutes from our house, and I showed up, and you were out by the road, and Chris was still, this guy who was basically it was a drunk driver who had hit these two other cars, and he was like blackout drunk, and he fled the scene, and he went down to the river. And Chris like went after him and like basically sat down with this guy. This guy was like hammered, crying, not really knowing what was going on. And yeah, Chris ended up talking to him. And
yeah, I remember walking down there and seeing this guy like hugging. Chris was like hugging him, like they were like hugging each other, and the guy was sobbing in his arms because Chris had told him. The guy was like so drunk, and he was like, I don't know what happened. Chris was like basically told him what happened, like someone died, and the guy was like freaking out, and he was like, and Chris was like holding the guy. The guy was sobbing that like, I just killed someone, I can't believe it. And it was just like wild because like I think most people, obviously, I mean, what the guy did was horrific. He was a drunk driver, he caused this terrible accident. But, Chris is just so, like, empathetic that, like, he saw this guy when he had this realization that he killed someone. The guy was, like, his life is ending, and Chris was, like, holding him in his arms as the guy was crying. And the police showed up, and Chris had, like, blood all over his shirt afterwards. But Chris ended up, like, staying in touch with this guy, right? Like, Colin, he went to jail, and Chris stayed in touch with him.
He went to jail. He actually got processed in the jail across the street from our apartment. And Chris, like, would call and just check in with him, and was like basically doing like probably the most hardcore 12-step call I've ever heard of. Right, this guy, I mean, he's now in prison for 30 years. It was his like 7th DUI. He had lost his license like 5 years prior to that. He thought he was in Norwalk, Connecticut, and Chris like stayed in touch with him and like talked to him about like finding a way to like get him connected with meetings and just like just supporting him. And like, yeah, like what Ted said, like, I don't know, like most people would just be like, fuck that guy, he's a piece of shit, he's an alcoholic that like destroyed these two other people's lives, and like his life is worth nothing.
And which he did, it is horrible, but like there is this element of Chris was able to recognize he's also a human being, and so it was wild.
Yeah, that is crazy. I think I heard that story. I don't know if I heard it on Dopey or I just remember one of you telling me that story.
I know.
The weirdest thing is that Chris didn't tell that story. And I don't think it's one of those things we'll never know. I refuse to believe that he was too altruistic not to tell the story. I refuse to believe that. I think it just didn't pop up in his head. But because me and him, we did 142 episodes, and we probably had 60 stories between the two of us. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
that's weird then, because that was a huge deal. Yeah. And what's funny, what's interesting is like full circle, like a year later, or I don't know how much later, when there was a time when Chris had been sober for a few years and he relapsed, and he was at our house. Remember, Colin? We ended up having to call the police on Chris. He was like super drunk, and the cop that showed up to arrest Chris,
put him in the drunk tank.
I don't know, detain him, put him in the drunk tank, whatever, was the same cop that showed up on the scene of the crime when Chris was like consoling this guy, right? So it was just this wild fold. The cop came in and immediately knew him. He's like, oh, I remember you, because he was the guy in recovery who was helping this drunk driver. And then now the cop shows back up to basically like cuff him and bring him in the drunk tank a year later after he relapsed. It was just an interesting kind of synchronicity moment.
Yeah.
Crazy. That shit is crazy, because what it says like, we're the same people that kill people, we're the same people that help people, and then we can turn up totally wasted again at
Yeah.
the drop of a dime. And I think it makes me. And do you still
No,
go to meetings, Ted?
I don't.
So what do you
I just
what do
like
you do for your
I
recovery?
just I just live. Meetings were so important for me the first couple years. I think a huge piece of that we've touched on the community. For me, that was everything. I needed this community, and honestly, for me, I just don't. I'm at a point in my life, and I've kind of been here for a while, but even stronger now. I just don't even think about like drugs and alcohol. I have 3 kids. I'm married. I have a job. I have 2 different jobs. I have all these like career, professional aspirations. Like drugs don't even cross my mind. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, I'd love to like go trip on ayahuasca or take LSD, and maybe I'll do that in the future. So, I have these like weird, but I have the thought of like drinking or taking pills. Like for me, it's just like not even an option. I value my energy, my focus, my drive, my being a father. Like that stuff is just where I'm at in my life is so important. I'm a very spiritual person. I meditate. I frequently like journal. I listen to all sorts of stuff on spirituality and self-help. I read about like personal empowerment, stuff like that all the time. I'm like obsessed with that like genre of stuff. So I'm constantly filling my brain with like stuff on how to be a better person, how to be a more effective person, right? So like, but meetings just aren't really a part of that in my life now.
And your job is an opportunity.
Yeah,
for service.
yeah, I do. I teach classes on health and wellness at a high school. I also do. I work I do counseling and coaching one-on-one with people. I do webinars and stuff, and I'm trying to like do more of that, like education on like mental health and things of that nature. And so yeah, for sure, it's like something that every day I'm having conversations with people on like how to better themselves. That it naturally makes me live into that, more often.
Yeah, I'm still connected to
Colin, what about you?
12-step community here. I probably go less than I have been. I've been really connected to the Dharma recovery community for a number of years. Started a few meetings in this area, which are now like huge, and run Dharma groups at work, and that's become kind of like a primary recovery practice for me. But like with 12-step stuff, this area, as Chris would put it, is a blue zone or whatever of recovery. So every store you walk into, there's a 12-step person, and I'm pretty locked in with that entire community as well. So it's still a part of my life for sure.
Well,
yeah, the
he would
source,
call it
blue
the
zone.
source.
Yeah,
Blue
it's
zone.
just.
That's
I
what
mean,
he would call it.
it's in the same
What's
category
blue
as the
zone?
source.
What's blue zone?
These like blue zones of recovery. That's how the source started, and he considered this area the source, which it is.
Or like we'd refer to it as like the island from Lost, like you can't leave the island. Like that's kind of where we would joke where like Chris Monroe, he left the island. But at the same time, for a lot of people, you got to
Totally.
branch out. But for some people, you stay in the
Yeah.
island. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, he's still
He needs
here.
to stay on
He's
the
still
island,
here in a lot of
for
ways.
sure. For
Still
sure.
here.
No, I get it. Listen, thank you guys. Is there anything that we didn't say that you wish you had said?
No,
I don't think so. I think it's crazy that Ted and I have never been on Dopey together. Because Dopey,
Well, Ted's been resistant.
we
to
did it
Dopey.
the
He's
night before
historically
his
Dopey
funeral, but just
resistant.
like him and I, because like Dopey started in our living room in Sheffield with phone calls to you. I remember Chris calling you when we first moved in there. I think you were trying to get clean. And like him being off the phone is like, fucking Dave, like I'm trying to like get him to do this, he's not listening, and like him complaining about you. And then all of a sudden you guys are starting a podcast together, and that like started out of our living room. So I don't know, it's just like it's just crazy that like however many years later we're like finally the 3 of us are on here, and it's pretty cool.
Well, Ted, again, he's been historically resistant to doing the show, and the only reason he did the funeral
No,
one is because
that
he
I was
had
so
to.
happy.
He could not
No,
do
let
it.
me
Chris is
clarify
dead.
a couple of things.
He had to do it.
The resistance, and the resistance is no more for a couple of reasons. I had just started working at a high school with minors, right? And so I was like, no, I know, but I do want to say, because this is kind of cool. I recently, over the past few years, I've told my story in front of all the students that I work with. And so just a few months ago, I got in front of the entire school. I told them my whole story of like recovery and everything. So I'm at a point now where like it's out there. But at first I was like super hesitant and resistant. I was like, I can't have these kids find out that I'm a drug addict, But now it's like I've been sober for 14 years. Like I don't fucking care. This is who I am. This is my past. I've shared it. And so, that's where the resistance came from. But it is wild that we've never done one, Colin. And happy we're doing it now.
I'm glad you guys did it. I love talking about Chris and because I'm obviously still all about this stupid podcast, and it doesn't exist without him. You know what I mean? Like I refuse to let him not be a part of it. So like I talk about him, every week in some capacity. I mention his name at least. And I have a picture of him here too. And I just like it's weird though. It's like I remember when he died, my sponsor had moved to California and he died, and me and him weren't going to meetings when he died, barely going to meetings. And I was like, I got to go to meetings after he died, and I got to find another sponsor. And I found this guy, and I told him about Chris, and he's like, sometimes you need to step over bodies. And I was like, go fuck yourself. I was like, I don't want to hear about it. You know what I mean? And then I found another sponsor, and it's just like his death has probably saved a lot of lives, and that's a hard pill to swallow in general. And then this weird personal thing is that I know Dopey wouldn't be a tenth as big as it is if he hadn't died. And still, I would give anything to have him be alive and do the stupid show. It's just like I don't think we would have kept doing it. I don't think he would have kept going. I'm just
and
crazy.
It's like it's unbelievable. Like, and I just texted you this the other day, Dave. Like it's unbelievable from where it started to what you've been able to do with the show today. Like I said, like I'm not very active on like social media. I'm not very, I don't follow super closely. Every time I do check in and see what you've got going on, I'm always just like blown away at like the momentum you have, the following you have, the impact you've had. And yeah, just kind of what Colin said. I remember when you guys started, and it was just like, it was like so stupid. I'm like, what are these idiots doing? Like telling it, I don't know, it was like the first story with like the turkey at rehab that Chris, whatever. You remember that? It must be like episode 1 or some of these times. I'm just like, I just remember thinking, I remember it was so funny because like we're like Chris and Dave, but I was just like, this is so dumb. I loved it, but I was like, it's so fucking dumb. And like, just to see what you guys are doing now, or what you're doing, Dave, is incredible, and it makes me so happy.
I appreciate it. I mean, like I'm totally obsessed with it to this day, and I mean, when he died, my wife was like, you don't have to do it anymore, and I was like, well, I want to do it, and I had said then that I'm gonna do it until it sucks or it isn't fun anymore, and it's still fun, and sometimes it sucks, but it's still fun. And I love it. This is all I ever wanted to do. So it's great for me. And Chris gave me that. So I'm forever grateful to that. But thank you guys for doing this.
Yeah, and, absolutely. My resistance is gone. Let's do it again for sure.
Cool.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Hold on. Stop. Or why don't we end the episode nicely? Because we did a long thing. This could be the whole episode. I don't need to do anything after this. Any last thoughts before we go on with our lives? How often are you sitting around thinking about Chris?
Anytime I play that Settlers game, I think about Chris, and I so many emotions come up because like he would piss me off so fucking much playing that game, and he just knew it, and he just like get under your skin. he loved it. He loved it. He would like
He loved that.
do shady things, and I mean, we still play that game at the houses. Like in like a cold winter night, we'll break out Settlers, and it's the same pieces that Chris and I used, and like the cards are intentionally bent by him to like he'd like do these weird shady things with bending the cards, and like yeah, and like I think about that, and like, and I also think about like why we're like when I'm gathered around these guys who don't even know who Chris is, was like who he was, and what he meant to like the house that they're living in, and it's like he's still there, and then like he's a reason why I do what I do, you know, like he's a major reason. So,
Ted, I have one more question though. When Dylan came on the show, we had talked a little bit about Chris in the beginning, and then he referred to Chris as Saint Chris, like this idea of Chris becoming this kind of figure that was more than anybody is when they're alive. Like, do you think that he's taken on this other kind of reality after he's dead, and he had been part of this show, which is, you know, it's a show, so it has some sort of like mythos to it, but do you think that that thing changes people's perception of their friend?
Yeah, you mean like do like changing how I think about him now that he's...
Do you think everybody was like, Jesus was such a fucking idiot when we played the Settlers game? Jesus was always cheating and bending the cards. Like, do you think if something changes when your friend dies the way?
I mean, for me, like he's just Chris, and he's just always been Chris, and he's just, yeah, I mean, he's legendary. He always was just like legendary though. Like Chris was just one of those people that like you met Chris and you loved him and you wanted to be around him, and he was just that, he had that like magnetic of a personality. I truly, I just loved Chris. Like I connected with him so hard. I wanted to hang out with him all the time. Anytime I could spend with him was amazing. So in my mind, he was kind of, but yeah, I guess you can't not do that. I think it does kind of turn him into this like this sort of like Saint Chris, this legend. There is one last thing I did want to share, because you asked, do we talk about Chris? How often do we talk about him? My wife and I, he comes up a lot in our conversation, but just the other day I texted Colin because I was going through my phone at old photos. I'm just going to show this really quick. And this came up. I don't know if you can see these, but they're basically these like robotic legs. And so Chris used to keep these in his closet when we lived together, and I was like, what the fuck are those? And they were his like robot, you know, bionic legs, whatever, because he had developed this condition called like slenderization of his ankles from drinking so much. So at some point he needed to wear these to help fortify his ankles, and he'd always tell us this story that one time when he was looking for drugs, he had no money, and so he went down to like this drug dealer's house, and he would talk about these legs are worth like $5,000 or some shit.
Carbon fiber.
He's like trying to buy heroin, and he goes up to his like drug dealer, and he's like, hey, you know, can I get some bags, whatever? And the guy's like, yeah. He tells him how much money. He's like, I don't have any money. He's like, but I got these, and he like brings them to his car, and he like pulls out these like titanium alloy, like custom fitted to Chris's shins. He's like, these are like custom alloy, you know, and the guy's like, I don't want these. He's like, dude, they're worth like thousands of dollars. And he's like, the guy's like, what the fuck am I gonna do with these? And he's like trying to sell him on these legs, and the guy's just like, dude, like, no, I'm sorry. And so every once in a while I go through my phone, I see these and I crack up, and you know, I text them to Colin and Dylan, and we all just like laugh about it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's amazing thing to think about. It's very easy to imagine. All right. Well, thank you guys. And well, this is our Christmas. See, I'm a fucking idiot. And when Chris died, I think the first year I called the day he died Christmas, like Christmas, MISS, and then his birthday we called Dopey Day, and on Dopey Day we put the logo over our eyes to commemorate Chris and grow a brand. You know how it goes. But fucking, I got lazy and I just started making his birthday.
Yeah, all right, we had two Christmases. That's good.
And Dopey Day. Yeah. But now we're bringing back Christmas as the day he died. So thank you guys for doing this. It's going to be up the week he died, and stay strong.
Toodles, Dopey Nation.
Toodles for Chris.
All right.
See you guys. Thanks, Dave. See you.